On this computer. All right. I have turned on recording and I'm going to turn off the joining and leaving chime. Okay. And let me do share screen. Oh, okay. Can people see my slides?
Yep. Yes.
Excellent. And let me turn on my camera. There we go. And I'm doing the reader mode rather than the usual presenter mode, simply because I want to be able to watch the chat and the participant list, so I can tell who's talking and I can respond to chats. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the 2022 Virtual Residency Workshop. I am super excited. We spend an entire year preparing for this week. And I'm very glad that you all have been able to join, and it looks like we just crossed the 100 mark and we keep going up. I'm very excited. Let's go right into it. A little bit of housekeeping as we're getting started here. First of all, the webpage for the workshop, and I've sent it to, I think, to all of you in email, but in any case, here it is in the slides. We post everything here. There are Google Docs there. And in fact, for each session, there's a Google Doc where all of you can take notes together and write stuff down and work together on stuff. So I encourage you to go to the Virtual Residency 2022 workshop webpage, and especially for each session, go to that Google Doc. The link will take you to the page of links to Google Docs. It's the Google Doc folder. If anybody's having any permission problems, let me know. If you have any trouble, you can send email to my personal email address, or you can send it to virtualresidency2022@gmail. Either way works, because the virtual residency one, this one here, actually auto forwards to my personal email. So either way. Yeah, thank you, Nina. I appreciate you putting that in the thing. Sounds like so far things are chugging along nicely. Someone should probably test and make sure they can edit the document. Just put a comment in there. We'll have some fun stuff as we go. We're using Zoom all week, so it's compatible with everything. I think by now, most people are accustomed to Zoom. You should be fine. Please mute yourself when you're not otherwise like asking a question or having a discussion with the group, and then unmute to do those things, but then remute yourself. I do have a mute all button if things are not going well, but I'd rather you all manage that yourselves. Also, please keep your camera off unless you are talking, like making a comment or asking a question or whatever. You don't have to turn your camera on ever, but please don't just leave it on, because some people have limited bandwidth, and having a lot of video activity can make it difficult for them to follow along in the sessions. I already said all this, so we're good to go. If you are new to Zoom, if you're on the Zoom session, you must have already done the following. You got to have a Zoom account. It can be a free account, no problem, but you have to have some Zoom account to be able to log in. This is a thing that OU put in, and many institutions. If you're doing audio only from within the USA, there's a whole bunch of numbers you can call. These are all toll numbers. There are no toll-free numbers for this, but nowadays most people within the continental US don't pay a per minute charge for making a long distance call within the continental US, so you should be okay. If you are outside the US, there's likewise no toll-free option, but many countries have Zoom numbers available within the same country. So hopefully nobody's paying a lot of money to participate in this event. It's meant to be free, but We can only go as far as we can go. Remember, camera off, mic muted, we're good to go. Quick outline, this is an experiment, and I'll walk you through that a little bit. It's an ongoing experiment. We've been doing this experiment since 2015. We still don't know what we're doing, but at least we're having fun with it. We'll talk about CI facilitators. If you call into Zoom with a phone, it's default mic on. How do you turn off the mic? When you log in, there's supposed to be an audio message, an automatic audio message that tells you how to mute. I think it's like pressing the star or something. I can't remember. One of the touch tone buttons should do it for you. Or if you're doing it on a cell phone, most cell phone, *6, yeah, that's probably right. Most cell phones also have a mute feature built into the cell phone, so you can do that as well, or instead. All right, we'll talk about CI facilitators. I'll give you a little background on the virtual residency and how it originally got started. We'll talk about why we're doing this instead of the more standard approaches to training that people take on the enterprise IT side. And we'll dig deep into the virtual residency and this year's workshop. We'll talk about the new Sifted program and then talk about why this is all about you and how important you are to this effort. So again, this is an experiment. Some of this material is reuse and updating of material we've used previously. Some of it is brand spanking new. You are the 8th cohort of this national program. You're helping us figure out how to do all of this. And the way you're helping us figure it out is let's just do it together and see what happens. And only you can make this process a success. So please ask questions. I am happiest when you constantly interrupt me with chat comments, with questions. I love that, because if I just drone on and on, I will be really, really boring. But if we have a conversation, I'll be more interesting both to you and to myself. So volunteer your ideas, volunteer your experiences. You have to be in charge, not us. We're just the ones dumb enough to volunteer to run a session. It's so new, we don't know what we're doing. That's the beauty of it. We love not knowing what we're doing. And of course, that's the nature of research. If we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be research. Let's talk about facilitators. Miron Livni, the guy who invented high throughput Condor, which is a software technology for doing single core and single node jobs across great geographic distances, he coined the term Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Research and Education Facilitator, or ACI REF. We've sort of squeezed that down just to cyber infrastructure facilitator or research computing facilitator, something like that. So a facilitator, a CI facilitator, someone who works with researchers and educators, users of cyber infrastructure, to help them improve their research and education productivity and aspirations to think bigger through cyber infrastructure, and especially advanced cyber infrastructure. It's normal for one or a few people to have responsibility for hundreds and hundreds of users. So at my institution, it's 1.7 FTE for the benefit of about 800 people, not including students in courses, so round up and call it 1,000. At some institutions, it's a part-time gig. Maybe it's also the person who is the sysadmin of the local cluster. At others, it's a full-time thing, and maybe there's a whole team. And people come from a broad variety of backgrounds. Faculty, they could be current faculty, they could be former faculty, postdocs, research staff, IT professionals. A very common way this happens nowadays is the CIO goes, yeah, you're in charge of research computing now, Janet. And suddenly Janet is in charge. And that deer in the headlights look that she gets is why we want you to come to this workshop. I gather, Ashley, that you went through exactly that process. And then students, graduate students, undergrads, this is becoming increasingly common and popular. The 5 facings, and here we're using facing as a verb, not as a noun. So a researcher-facing person is a person whose role is to work with researchers. So a facilitator, for example. System facing, their role is to work with machines. So typically a sysadmin, a network engineer, someone like that. Data facing, like a research data librarian. Software facing, like a research software engineer, which is a growing, worldwide growing profession. And then strategy and policy facing, we used to call this stakeholder facing, like an institutional cyber infrastructure leader, like the director of a supercomputing center or what have you. Now, what's a facilitator not, or at least not necessarily? A facilitator is not necessarily a computer scientist. In fact, I would argue that the overwhelming majority of facilitators do not have a CS degree and come from a non-CS background. Now, there are plenty of CS folks, but they are far from the majority. You know, there's this joke they say about war is too important to be left to the generals. Well, by the same token, computing is too important to be left to the computer scientists. And I say that as a computer scientist. A CI facilitator is not necessarily a systems-facing person. They might be, they might have a partially systems-facing role, partially user-facing role, but they might have no systems-facing role at all. And in fact, one of the folks on the session right now is one of our researcher-facing people who has no system-facing role at all. Now, on the other hand, one of our other researcher-facing folks also has a system-facing role, so it varies. Not necessarily a researcher. Some CI facilitators come from a pure enterprise IT background and stumbled their way into research computing, sometimes by design, more often by accident. I think many of us fell backwards into a steaming pile of career entirely by accident. Very few people set out, or at least historically, very few people have set out to have a research computing career and a career as a research computing provider. This makes me feel good about generally feeling like I studied the wrong chapter for the test when talking about this stuff. Yeah, that's exactly correct, Brandon. And there is no wrong chapter. You bring to the table whatever your set of background and experiences and so on is, and we as an aggregate, we as a community learn from each other. And a CI facilitator is not necessarily an IT professional. In fact, probably that's the least common, although it's still pretty common. Well, okay, the least common is probably computer science degree, but second least common is IT professional. But that doesn't mean there are in fact plenty of IT professionals and plenty of computer scientists. What do? We work directly with researchers and educators, both STEM and non-STEM. And I want to say for the folks who are in disciplines where the word research and researcher are looked on a little bit askance, I want to say that for the rest of the week, when we use the word research or researcher, we're referring to all of research, scholarship, and creative activity. This is not limited to research in the most literal sense. It is not limited to STEM. A lot of it is STEM and a lot of it is research, but it's not limited to either of those. The purpose of facilitation, the role of the facilitator, is to work with that researcher, again, under that broad definition, to advance the computing and data intensive aspects of their research, again, under the broader terminology. So how is that done? Adapting research workflows to CI systems, right? So helping someone run their research on a supercomputer or a cloud or a particular storage system, teaching how to use these systems, being the bridge, serving as the bridge between systems-facing folks and users and researchers, anticipating what their new needs will be for various emerging activities. So probably the most common example of the last decade or so has been accelerators, especially GPUs, and in particular for machine learning. Helping researchers and educators and scholars and creatives who have limited coding experience to design software and to port that software to advanced systems. This is something that is really, really hard for non-programmers. And it's not a good idea, in my opinion, to volunteer to write someone's code. I've done it and it's proven to be a mistake. It is a good idea to help them learn how to do it. Yeah, NSF considers social sciences as a STEM field. Absolutely. Social sciences are well within the National Science Foundation's remit, whereas humanities explicitly are not. Okay, and then teaching cybersecurity and compliance for research, for example, HIPAA. Developing strategies for specific use cases, teaching data management. Now, this is something we're typically doing in collaboration with data-facing folks like research data librarians. Providing access to training, both your own training locally at your institution and national opportunities like software carpentry or Exceed, and coming soon Access, the successor to Exceed, training capabilities, things like that. Helping researchers decide what's the right technology for them, recruiting new researchers, new use cases, being an advocate for researchers to central administration. This is what researchers, or at least computing and data intensive researchers, need the administration to work on. Preparing the CI, the cyber infrastructure parts of publications and posters and grant proposals. Very, very important. And in some cases, writing the grant proposal, leading the grant proposal, especially if the grant proposal is to get cyber infrastructure for your institution. So what qualities do CI facilitators typically have? Well, so think of this as a two-dimensional system. And on one dimension is a spectrum between loving technology and loving research. So people who love research, as a general rule, are more likely to be researchers. People who love technology are more likely to be technologists. Now, on the other axis, we've got people who love people and people who love things. So if you love technology instead of research and you love things instead of people, you're going to be a great sysadmin, right? If you love research more than technology and you love things more than people, you might make a great researcher, though not typically in social sciences. If you love people more than things and technology more than research, you might be great at the help desk. And if you love people more than things and research more than technology, you might be a fantastic educator. We sit in the middle of all of that. We love research and technology. We love people and things. And that's what makes us really, really good at this job. So who cares about this? Well, researchers love us, right? Researchers love that we show up and get them over a hump, right? Because usually it's not that they need to have a particular thing all the time. They don't need help from us every minute of every day. They hit a speed bump and they need our help to get over it, right? National leadership loves this, and there's a lot of documentation now coming out of national bodies, government bodies, national organizations saying this is really important. Maria, thank you. Can you send that to me in an email? That would be really, really helpful, because I'm probably not going to remember to put this stuff to track back in the chats. Incentivize development of new and ongoing efforts that bring together CI professionals, like the virtual residency, to learn from one another and generate community efforts to identify and improve leading practices. Well, here we are, right? This is from the NSF, from their Cyber Infrastructure 2030 report. Develop mechanisms to support teaming of scientists and engineers with CI professionals to ensure that they can benefit from CI. The skills needed are very advanced and beyond the reach of most domain scientists. We can't expect the researchers to know all this stuff. So we know this stuff. That's our job, to know this stuff, to learn it from each other, and then to be able to bring it to the researchers and help them put it into practice. Exponential growth in our field, but that doesn't mean we're keeping up. All right, a little background. Way back in the distant mists of time in 2013, in the long, long ago, there were 13 institutions who said, we'll write a proposal for $33.5 million. I'm not sure how they came up with that dollar figure. 4 years, 13 institutions, giant chunk of money. It's got some hardware in it for advanced networking, blah, blah, blah. And our little piece of that here at OU was, we're going to create a little program to teach people how to be a facilitator. I think it was Marone again who came up with the term virtual residency. And there was also a bit about stuff that would go on in EPSCoR, blah, blah, blah. Not going to go into too much detail, but for those of you who are not familiar with EPSCoR, the Established Program for the Stimulation of Competitive Research used to be an experimental program. That was what the E originally stood for. It was an experiment in the sense that they didn't change the name until 30 years in because, it was an experiment. We needed 30 years to figure out that it worked. States that get less than 0.75% of federal research funding are essentially eligible for some extra help. Well, the NSF didn't have $33.5 million. They did have about, I think it was 5.3 million. So half the institutions got kicked out, including my institution. And they cut it to 2 years. They got rid of the hardware part. Okay, well, that was fine. But then in the meantime, the NSF created this new program called Campus Cyber Infrastructure. And so we actually got one of those for some hardware. And that stuff has been in production for a long, long time now. That was followed. Then they added a piece where they said you can get a grant for a campus cyber infrastructure engineer at your institution. Of course, we figured everybody and their dog would submit one of those proposals because it's very rare that the federal research funding agencies offer to fund the salary of a non-researcher. So we said, let's submit a proposal for that. But then we needed a differentiator, something that we could add that would make our proposal interesting. So we added in the virtual residency that had gotten cut from the original ACI ref proposal. And you can see it here in bold. We said, basically, we're just gonna create this program out of no money. And by the way, this was a long-standing idea. We had previously submitted this idea 6 times to 2 other programs. We submitted it 3 times for $3 million, fail, fail, fail. We submitted it 3 more times for $250,000, fail, fail, fail. And then we submitted it for $40,000. And for $40,000, they were willing to take a leap of faith and give it a shot. The reviewers loved it, by the way. And in fact, when we wrote the proposal that eventually became the Campus Research Computing Consortium, or CARC, this was the big thing that they loved about the broader impacts. And they said, assuming that it's not just those 6 institutions. So the lowest we've ever gone was 91%, not just those 6 institutions. So clearly we've done a reasonable job on that. Okay, now, why can't we just use the way that enterprise IT trains people? Why can't we do that? Well, the answer is the way enterprise IT trains people is based on a scale of millions. In 1970, there were already 500,000 IT professionals in the US. It was about 0.5% of the total US civilian workforce. By 2014, it was 4.5 million, and that was about 3%. So about 1 in 30, 1 in 33 US workers, not civilian workers, were IT professionals. So at that scale, you've got degree programs running from associate's degrees to doctorates and their certificate programs. You've got professional certifications of every description. There's tons of resources for updating your skills. And even this doesn't take into account that there are also now, and there have been over the last 10 years, an explosion of degree programs for data science, which for our purposes, let's think of as a combination of computer science plus statistics. I know it's not really that, but for simplicity, let's sort of think of it that way. Research computing professionals, there are thousands of us, not millions. So there's no way to justify, for example, at the University of East Podunk, there's no way to justify creating a degree program, because there's not going to be enough people in East Podunk or near enough driving distance, or even for an online program to actually justify having such a degree program. There's no degree program. There's no certifications. We're working on changing that. I've got some slides. There's minimal resources for updating your skills. The best we can hope for at this scale is informal education. Okay, so let's talk about the virtual residency. What is the virtual residency? We teach pre-service and in-service cyber infrastructure facilitators how to do cyber infrastructure facilitation, or how to do it better. We also have a hidden secret agenda, which I'll talk about presently. So how do we do that? Well, the biggest part of it, of course, is our annual workshop. We do a week-long workshop. We've done this every summer since 2015. In 2015, we had no idea what we were doing, and 50 people showed up. Since then, we've learned somewhat what we're doing, and a lot more than 50 people show up. I see 178 logged in now, including me. And in fact, the University of California system adopted some of our ideas and ran some programs. First, specifically about facilitation, and now that switched over to things like cybersecurity, but using effectively the same methods. Okay. Oh, and you're restarting it this year. Excellent. Glad to hear that. Then we do workshop planning calls. We typically have a meeting at the SC conference. Now, the last couple of years, of course, because of COVID, we couldn't do that. But typically, that's a thing we do. We had for 4 years a grant proposal writing apprenticeship. It ran for 4 years because the proposal we were writing failed 3 times. And then in last year, we got the grant proposal from the NSF Cyber Training Program, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We also did a paper writing apprenticeship, so we've done that now for 4 years. We've gotten 3 papers published. That's pretty good. This year's paper did not get published because we took a flyer at would they publish a future-looking paper that was not about actual accomplishments, but about what we plan to do, and the answer turned out to be no. They will not publish a forward-looking paper, only a paper about what we've actually done. And then we've turned our grant proposal writing apprenticeship into a grant running apprenticeship that we've been doing for quite some months now. And I should say about these apprenticeships, the idea is, the way I learned grant proposal writing was, I have a friend in chemical engineering here at my institution. He writes amazing grant proposals, and so he effectively took me under his wing as a co-PI, and I sat with him while he wrote his proposals, and he thought out loud while we were doing this, and I learned so much from him, and I thought, well, why can't everybody learn that way? So we just started writing grant proposals on Zoom, and it's worked beautifully. Why do we do this? Well, typically, a CI facilitator has strong experience within their own discipline, which typically is not computer science, but they don't necessarily have experience across many disciplines. Most of them haven't been faculty. Some of them have little or no research experience. Some of them have tons of research experience. Especially if you're an IT staff member from an enterprise background, you probably don't know that much about research computing or research. You probably have not done research in any formal way yourself. Even if you do have a strong research background, you typically don't know much about other disciplines outside of your own. Back when we started this, nobody else was trying to do this. And the thing that has changed, when I started, and this is 20 years ago, when I started doing this kind of work, nobody knew what it was, so nobody expected anything specific out of it. And so as long as you were adding value, you could, if it took me 5 years to learn what my job was, nobody was screaming at me about that. Well, it don't work that way no more. Nowadays, if you don't already know what to do, if you can't hit the ground running, you're not going to be successful. So our goal is to help you hit the ground running. All right, who are we talking about? Well, since the 2015 workshop all the way through last night, we have served over 1,100 people from over 400 institutions in every US state and 4 US territories, so all of the EPSCoR jurisdictions, plus 14 other countries on 5 continents. And there is one person from Australia signed up today now, and I think one person from Brazil. So if they get on this week, I think it was South America that was missing. If they get on this week, then we will actually have covered all the continents except Antarctica. And I honestly despair of Antarctica. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the winter over folks really care that much. So that's, yes, Saudi Arabia also. We've had tons of people from Asia, Africa, well, tons, a modest number of people from Africa, and I think 1 or 2 people from the Middle East, but I won't swear to it. Anyway, minority serving institutions, about, what would this be? About 1 in 5.5? No, 1 in 6.5 of our participating institutions are minority serving. And that's 1/6 of all bachelor's granting and above minority serving institutions, and about 1 in 10 of all minority serving institutions in the US. And I'm basing this on the Carnegie classification, if you want to look it up. 114 non-PhD granting institutions, so a little over a quarter. And I don't think I've marked that, Frankie. So thank you for pointing that out. Can you send that to me in email? 117 institutions in all of the EPSCoR jurisdictions, EPSCoR states and territories, and 272 of the institutions, so almost 2/3, are campus champion institutions, and that's slightly over 3/4 of all the campus champion institutions. And I did go through the list last night to make sure that if any institution had dropped out of the campus champions or been added in, that I was counting them properly. Okay, and that's for all of our activities. Who do we have here? Well, of course, we don't know. There are 180 of us on the call right now, and actually slightly more because there's one group where it's several people. Please, folks from that group, please send an email with the list of names and preferably email addresses. But we had, and this number's already out of date, this was from last night, 510 pre-registrants. I think now it ended up being like between 515 and 520. 234 institutions. That went up a little bit because we got a couple more. And that's from almost all the US states and territories, plus 12 other countries. We, of course, far fewer people will actually participate, actually attend, than sign up. There are always people who sign up and then aren't able to come. That's fine. But we certainly hope that as many as possible do. Why is it hard to help researchers? There's really 4 reasons, and I'm going to dig into this more deeply later, and because of time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this now, because in the next session, I'll dig into this in much more depth. But ubiquity, applicability, system complexity, and conceptual distance. And again, we'll work on this in the next session. Is it normal to have on-campus cyber infrastructure? Well, it depends on the kind of institution. So very high research activity universities, the R1s, all but 3. So whatever that is, 97% or whatever that is, all but 3. There's one institution that only does cloud, and there are 2 institutions, R1 institutions, that get their research computing from a different institution within the same system of institutions. But that's those are the only ones among the R1s. With R2s, there are a little under half, I think, yeah, about half of the R2s have on-campus research computing. All of the top 20, all but 1 of the top 50, all but 3 of the top 100, and so on and so on. It is quite common, this is the US News rankings, by the way, it is quite common to have on-campus research computing resources. And if you're at an institution, what is required to be a campus champion institution? Your institution sends a letter saying, we want to be a campus champion institution. Here's our list of campus champions. Thank you, Kurt, for the link. Yeah, it'll walk you through the process. It's very straightforward. It's hopefully not particularly a barrier. Most institutions have virtual residence as well. There's only one top 10 institution that we've been hammering on. I've sent them a lot of emails, but I haven't convinced them just yet. And that same one is the only one in the top 25. This is silly. It says 51 of the top 50, and that's less than 100%. That's because there's a tie at number 48 or 49 or something. So the top 50 is actually like 54 institutions or something like that. 72 of the top 75, 89 of the top 100, and so on and so forth. It's very, very common to have virtual residence. And many of you are at institutions that hadn't participated in, well, some of you are at institutions that hadn't participated until this year, and I pestered you mercilessly. And by the way, for the record, I know many of you have been pestered mercilessly about participating in this workshop. I only do that because it works, and because not pestering you mercilessly does not work. So as soon as you can convince all of your colleagues around the country and around the world to participate without having to be pestered, I'll stop. Good luck. And again, so for virtual residency, all but 4 of the R1s and more than half of the R2s, including some of the R2s that do not have on-campus research computing resources. We did an evaluation a couple of years ago, and we published it last year at the PERC conference. And that was done by Lizanne DeStefano and Lorna Rivera of Georgia Tech. Lorna's now in industry, but Lizanne is at Georgia Tech continuing all that sort of work. And we published a paper about it. The demographics were very happy. 30% of our participants up to that point and in that workshop, and this is pretty typical for us in general, it's usually around 28 to 30%, are women. Now, of course, that's less than the population as a whole in this country, but it's more than all computing and IT occupations, and it's about double what we generally see at, for example, the SC conferences. In terms of underrepresented minorities, 21%, again, less than the US population as a whole. I can't find any data for the SC conferences by race and ethnicity, but for computing occupations, it's double what all IT and computing occupations are. And we know from experience that research computing is generally worse than all IT occupations, so we can assume it's more than double. Can't prove it, but past experience suggests that's incredibly likely. So what came out of that? Well, it turns out we did a pretty good job. Yeah, thank you, Chris. We had all the respondents rate everything on a 1 to 5 scale. The worst rated session was a 3.9. The best rated session was a 4.4. Underrepresented minorities reported a slightly but statistically significantly better experience than non-minorities. Women on a single session, there was a statistically significant, although not too big, difference. They had lower satisfaction than men, but that was the only case where there was a statistically significant difference. Does it work? Well, you know, the evaluation certainly suggests it does. So does the fact that people and institutions keep coming back. So as of yesterday, I ran the numbers last night, 79% of virtual residency institutions have participated in multiple activities, and 65% have participated in multiple categories of activities over the years. Those numbers will plummet as of this week, of course, because there'll be people who this week will be their first participation, but then they'll come back up over the year before we get to the workshop next year. Dana has a whole talk about this. This is an incomplete list, but that's coming later this week. Dana Brunson will give a presentation about the cyber infrastructure landscape and organizations. We encourage you to join these many organizations, especially the campus champions. Dana and Tim, sorry, thank you, Dana. So please do participate And please join these organizations. They will be very helpful for your institution, your researchers, and for your career. All right, so the workshop, this is our schedule. Here we are right now, the overview talk. I'm coming back and doing effective communication mid-morning. Then in the afternoon, we've got Bruce Mason talking about what it's like to be faculty so that you have a clear idea what that's about. And then I think it's Dylan Perkins is doing user support. Tomorrow, we've got Jacob Fasotande doing the CI landscape, system, service providers, and technologies. Then Dirk Colbury is going to be leading a session on how to do an intake interview, and he's going to give demos of that. We're going to come back on Wednesday, I'll talk about this in a moment, and actually practice that skill. Then Jerry Perez will be doing components and design of an HPC cluster tomorrow afternoon, followed by Wallace Chase doing research networking overview. On Wednesday, Dirk is going to do how to communicate that there's a problem. Then Armand Pazuki is going to run a session. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Then there's a panel on researcher perspectives. I think it's Annalie is moderating that panel. Is that right? Then in the early afternoon is when Armand is going to run the how to do the intake interview session. And then we've got Josh Jelinski on how to deploy community codes, and Prasad Madhumaj is going to do debugging and tuning. So those are, I think, the biggest technical components of the week, technological. Then on Thursday, we've got the cyber infrastructure landscape organizations that Dana and Tim are going to be presenting. Then Dirk's back for another cyber ambassadors session, leading the change and leading with principles. Then we'll have another panel from CI organization leaders. What do CI organizations need from facilitators? And then a panel from the perspective of systems-facing professionals, primarily sysadmins, how to work effectively with them. And then on Friday morning, we've got Jason Wells presenting research data management, and we'll wrap up with stories from the trenches. This is where we swap lore together. We tell each other stories. And because of the holiday on July 4th, we know people want to get their weekend started early. So we're ending, this is very unusual for us. We don't typically do this. We're ending Friday at noon so that you can start your celebration and enjoyment of 4th of July weekend early. You can get that agenda right off the webpage. Here's the list of presenters. We have 32 presenters from 23 institutions. This includes speakers, people giving talks. This includes panel moderators and panelists. How do we pick them? Anybody who dumb enough to volunteer gets put to work. That's my whole career in a nutshell. So the biggest complaint we've gotten in past years is too much of the same people over and over. So we wheedled and begged and pleaded and got on our knees and clasped our hands and said, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please. And we got these nice folks to volunteer, or in some cases, they got voluntold. And many of you have been pestered by those emails. What are we here to accomplish? We're here to learn how to work with researchers who are using cyber infrastructure, how to find them, how to help them. Ultimately, my evil secret plan is to turn CI facilitators into CI leaders, first at their own institution, and then at the national level, and in fact, at the international level as well. Our goal is that you become, take over the world. Think of it as God, what is the name of the two cartoon mice? Pinky and the Brain. Every night we're going to try to take over the world, right? So that's our goal, is to be Pinky and the Brain, except to actually succeed. And in particular, here's what I believe. The people who best understand what researchers need are the ones who talk to researchers all the time. Well, guess who that is? That is the researcher-facing cyber infrastructure professionals. I would venture to say, except for our VP for Research office, There is no one at my institution who knows more about what our researchers need as a whole in the aggregate than our group, our organization on campus, because we talk to them all the time. What are we not here to do? We're not trying to do a lot of technical content. If you showed up hoping to learn MPI program, you're going to be very disappointed. There are plenty of other places you can go to learn the technical content. And there's no point in us duplicating that effort. There are wonderful training programs to learn how to write OpenMP code or how to write a Python wrapper around TensorFlow. And we encourage you to pursue those. We think those are really, really important, and they will be very valuable for you, your researchers, and your career. We're not trying to teach that. We're trying to teach you the profession of cyber infrastructure facilitation and ultimately of cyber infrastructure leadership. So that's our hidden secret agenda, as I've mentioned. We want to transition you into leadership roles. Okay, now, a new program just started September 1st, so we're about 9 months in. SIFTED, the Certified Cyber Infrastructure Facilitator Training and Development Program. So what's the idea? Well, first, there's an NSF grant. This was, I mentioned we had the grant proposal writing apprenticeship. We stopped doing that because it succeeded. We got the grant. It took multiple iterations, but we got the grant. We got $300,000 over 2 years. We're not going to get it done in 2 years. We'll be taking a no-cost extension. I guarantee that. We're nowhere near as far along as we had been hoping, and that's okay. We're learning as we go. One of the things that we've learned is that creating the stuff I'm about to talk about takes a lot more labor and a lot more careful thought and discussion than we had anticipated, which makes sense. So we're taking the time to do it as right as we can. Okay. So what do I mean by certification? I do not mean a matriculated graduate or undergraduate certificate. I don't mean that. I mean something morally equivalent to Red Hat certified engineer or CISSP or one of those, right? Only in this case, it's for cyber infrastructure facilitation. Okay. So, and by the way, SIFTED, if you Google SIFTED, at least the last time I checked this, I didn't check last night. #1 is the Canadian Center for International Fisheries Training and Development. At least it's training and development, right? So we're not that. Good on them. Fish is important, but we are the Certified Cyber Infrastructure Facilitator Training and Development. It's non-matriculated. It's a professional development and informal education certification. It's not a certificate of participation. I've been involved with those. I've given those out. My dissertation is annotating a fish genome, so I should do both. You have my blessing to pursue both, Amanda. Go team. But we're just going to talk about the one, not so much the other. So the way this works is we're going to be creating a bunch of badges where a badge consists of a training module, a score, an exam, and a scoring rubric for the exam. And a collection of these badges or specific collections of these badges will constitute certification. Our goal ultimately is to have multiple levels of certification. In this pilot project, we're just working on the first level. Why aren't we doing a degree or a graduate certificate? There aren't enough numbers to make that work. You've got to have tens of thousands of people to justify degree programs. The reality is most people have never heard of the thing we do, right? And if they haven't heard of the thing we do, they're not going to pursue a career in it. They're certainly not going to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a degree or even a graduate or undergraduate certificate in something they've never even heard of. They don't know whether it's something that's interesting to them. So here's an example that was an unhappy thing. So Texas State Technical College actually created, this is probably getting on to 15 years ago now, they created an associate's degree program in HPC system administration, and it failed. because nobody knew what HPC was. So why would they choose to pursue a degree? So then they switched it to cloud, because at least people have heard of cloud. That's gone now. They do cybersecurity, which everybody and their dog is interested in getting a degree in. So, and they've made a huge success out of that. But the things that were interesting to our community, they couldn't generate a big enough group of consumers to keep the program going. All right, what are our objectives? Well, from the perspective of the facilitators, provide the training and the proof that you've mastered the skills that are mission critical to facilitation, and then cultivate and expand the community. What's the perspective from cyber infrastructure organizations? Increase uptake of facilitation, which increases uptake of cyber infrastructure. And from the perspective of the STEM researchers, who ultimately this is meant to serve, increase their ability and their productivity for computing and data intensive research by applying expertise that the researchers lack, but the facilitators have. How do we do this? Well, we got to figure out what skills are the most valuable. So we're going to be doing a survey. That survey is at the evaluators waiting to go out. So we're going to ask experienced facilitators, organization leaders, and we'll also ask both of those groups to recommend some experienced research and computing and data intensive researchers who use cyber infrastructure. Give us some names that we can further ask questions of, and we'll ask them some questions as well. Based on the list of skills that they say, in addition to our own understanding, we'll create a training mechanism, an exam, and a scoring rubric, and then pilot test that partially through the virtual residency, partially through creating online resources. Then we construct collections of badges that constitute certification. We test all of this and we evaluate it. We have an evaluator, same evaluator who does the Exceed evaluation. So what are their challenges? What skills do facilitators need? How do the facilitators build credibility? How do we train enough of them to meet the need? How do we know that what we're doing works? And how do we sustain it over the long term? In our pilot project, we're not asking, how do we get to multiple levels of certification? That's in the long run, we'll be doing that. And how do we meet the needs of industry? We're not asking that question either. Ultimately, probably that's something we should be pursuing, but in the near term, not under this pilot project. All right. You too. This is really, really important, okay? Why do we need you to be an institutional cyber infrastructure leader? Well, I never do anything unless I have two categories of reasons for doing that thing. I need good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons to do the thing, so I can look myself in the mirror every morning. But I also need wicked, selfish, base, mercenary reasons to do that thing so that I'm actually motivated to get off my duff and do it. Okay. So on the good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons, you have good ideas. And by the way, I know a lot of people suffer from imposter syndrome. Why me, right? Why? I don't know anything. You know more than you know. Remember, an expert is someone who's 5 minutes ahead of everybody else. You have experience. You have made observations. You've developed wisdom and knowledge over time, or you will as you become more active in this role. And that will lead you to have good ideas. And that will lead you to be a good advocate for good ideas, your own and others, right? If those ideas were implemented, that would enormously help your institution's researchers, right? And researchers across the country, around the world. You love helping researchers. That's why you got into this business. Well, okay. Those of you who the boss pointed and said, you're in charge now, you didn't know you loved helping researchers. That's news to you, but I promise you, it is actually true. You absolutely love helping researchers, or you will soon. So you are going to be finding ways to do it better so that your love for doing it translates into something effective. And by the way, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, this is the best thing about this job. is you get to see the value of what you're doing every day. And your administration, they know they want research. They know they want research computing. They don't know how to get it. Why would they? Right? They've got no background in that. But you have background in that, or you're going to develop background in that. And that's where you can help. You can help your administration to understand, and this is part of our job, by the way. I imagine many of us are at institutions where administrators turn over at some relatively predictable rate, right? Not any individual one, but in the aggregate, it's pretty common, for example, for institutions to turn over their administrators about every 5 years. Well, if you're going to have a 20-year career in research computing, or a 40-year career in research computing, one of the things you're going to find yourself doing over and over and over is educating your administration about research computing. If you're not doing that, then administrators will come along and they will say, oh, this is expensive. This costs 7 figures a year. Why don't I repurpose that for some other important thing that I think is, some super duper thing that we should have? But if they understand the value of what you're doing, then they will not be tempted to repurpose your budget. Okay. Now, what are the wicked, selfish, mercenary base reasons for being an institutional cyber infrastructure leader? First of all, it pays better, right? People who are willing to do the work, but not be held accountable for the overall outcome, are never going to be paid as much as people who are willing to be held accountable, right? The exchange you get is, I will hold you accountable and I'll pay you more in order to make that palatable. So if you want the better pay, you're going to have to go into some kind of leadership. I was surprised how much education needs to be provided about research workflows to administration. This is interesting too. So we start by believing that what we know is common knowledge. We are shocked to discover, and I'll talk about this in the next session, we are shocked to discover that not only is that not true, it is literally the exact opposite of the truth. Okay, and someone said they will say your usual, I'm trying to see that chat. Put it in the cloud, they will say, your usual IT people administration. It is one of the big questions. Why isn't all this stuff in the cloud? One of my big answers, honestly, is almost no research intensive institution puts their research computing in the cloud. Do we think we're smarter than them? Are we smarter than Harvard that has 100,000 cores at the Massachusetts Green HPC Center? And if the answer is not yes, then they back off on that one. It's better job security. Again, the person who, and by the way, many of you may have experienced this in a relationship. I've experienced it, honestly, from both sides. When you're in a relationship, it's fine to be an adult in the relationship. It's exhausting to be the only adult in a relationship. The same is true in your work. It's fine to be a grown-up in the room. It's really hard to be the grown-up in the room. But that's what your institution needs. And frankly, that's what the researchers need. And that's how you're going to create job security for yourself, by willing to be a grown-up. Why be a national leader? Well, here's the good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons. The community needs you, right? There are never enough people willing to step forward and take leadership at the national level. So at the opposite end of the spectrum from this introductory workshop, we're also running a program called the Cyber Infrastructure Leadership Academy. We've done 2 workshops. We've got a plan for a 3rd one about a year from now. Not quite. That process, teaching people how to go from institutional cyber infrastructure leader to national cyber infrastructure leader, that process looks a lot like this process. structured very similarly, but is absolutely mission critical because the leaders are growing old and retiring. And so we've got to step up and fill in those gaps. Whether you like it or not, we're all going to end up being dragged kicking and screaming upstairs. So you might as well be ready. There's a misunderstanding about what is usual IT versus research computing. Ron, you're going to be delighted in the next session because I'm going to address that very explicitly in a way that you can take back to your administration and explain, and they will understand this explanation. I've play tested it extensively. Wicked selfish mercenary reason. When you get noticed by other national leaders, that advances your career because they think to themselves things like, gee, I need a collaborator on this 8-figure project. Oh, what about that guy, Henry? I could totally send him an email. But if they don't know you, how do they know they can rely on you? Okay, again, the professional ecosystem, and Dana and Tim are going to talk about this Thursday morning. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this except to say, join the Campus Champions, join the Campus Research Computing Consortium, and so on and so on. Cyber ambassadors, it goes on and on. Join these organizations because they will help you do your job better. They will get you in contact with your counterparts around the country and in some cases all over the world. And they will help you advance your career. I mentioned it before. Oh, could we have a link to the recording so that we can revisit them? Yeah, I will be posting all of the recordings on a YouTube page, and we will have a link to that YouTube page probably tonight or tomorrow on the website, on the workshop website. So all of the recordings will be there. It's just the lag is because I'm doing them on my laptop, and then I have to upload them, and it's a whole mess. It takes a while. The slides, some of the slides are available on the website. I will be pestering people. I do not guarantee that slides always get posted before the talk starts. We'll try to do that as often as we can, but I can't make any guarantees. And the videos, usually it's going to be several hours of lag. I hope not days, but definitely hours. Okay, imposter syndrome. Do you ever feel like you're not really qualified to do your job? And let me tell you how this works for me. Every time I go to a conference, even if it's like the conferencist conference in my heart, like the PERC conference, every time I go to a conference, I sit in some session, I listen to people talk to stuff, and I think, man, I am so far behind. I don't know what the heck these people are talking about. I'm a mess. I don't even belong here. I always have, always I have that. I promise you. And yet here I am telling you how to do your job, right? Well, part of that is, of course, I'm an insufferable know-it-all. So I'll try and tell you your job, even if I don't know what it is. But part of it is that, as it turns out, you can be valuable. You can help people, even if you're 5 minutes ahead of them. The first time that an undergrad came to me and said, I want some career advice. And I was just out of grad school myself. What business did I have giving anybody career advice, right? I was a postdoc. What did I know? And I sat down with the student and I talked through the issues with them. And the student walked away really happy because I didn't know a lot, but I knew more than them. So if you have imposter syndrome, good. You're normal. We all, not literally everybody, but a lot of people have imposter syndrome, even the ones you would never think. And honestly, it's good to stay humble, right? Let's not get an overly inflated picture of ourselves. How can you make your mark? You can create something new that's good, or you can take something that's good and make it better, okay? So here are some examples from my own career to give you a feel. Way back, the very first thing that our supercomputing center here did as a supercomputing center, literally the day we were founded. In fact, we were going to be founded the day before. And I said, let's wait an extra 24 hours so that the first day of our organization, the first day of our supercomputing center, we will teach a workshop. And we created this workshop series called Supercomputing in Plain English. And the idea was to teach mostly STEM researchers, how to use supercomputing in their research without piling them under a giant pile of jargon and technology. Just distill it down to the most important bits and figure out how to make it straightforward to explain. And happily, when I needed someone to help demonstrate something, I picked the funniest guy in the room. I didn't know how funny he was until that moment, but he was screamingly hilarious. And it was just beautiful. It was just a wonderful thing. And then we all went out and got drunk. It was lovely. So that was the very first thing that I created for my institution. And ultimately, we've done it for the whole world. Just put it out on Zoom. The One Oklahoma Cyber Infrastructure Initiative, Dana and I developed back in the late 2000s. It started as just an excuse to work together, and it's evolved into a model that other states have adopted, right? I created a business model for research data archiving, and we created the virtual residency. These are all things, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this gives you the flavor of it. We can create new things just by thinking through, well, what do our researchers need and what are their constraints? The Cyber Infrastructure Leadership Academy, which was an offshoot of the virtual residency. All of these things, if we hadn't invented them, they wouldn't exist. But we invented them, and now they can get better and better by the community building onto them and building them up, right? Dirk invented the Cyber Ambassadors program out of thin air, right? He had an idea, he turned it into reality, right? And you can make good things better. So the National Computational Science Institute does workshops every summer, and for a while they were doing parallel computing workshops. I went to one, and then I started helping teach, and I started adding content, and it changed the nature of the workshop, but in a wonderful way. Well, I flatter myself that it changed it in a wonderful way. I ended up being voluntold to run the education program at the SC11 conference. And I didn't create that program. It had existed for years and years before I showed up. And I don't want to say I made it hugely better, because the people who were running it already, running the sessions, had already had lots of experience, but I was able to make it better. And the Campus Champions, that thing was around for what, 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, Dana, before you and I came on board as leadership. But yep, we were able to improve it. If your organization can, there's a group called the Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation. Think of it as the de facto professional society for supercomputing center directors in the US. Academic mostly, some government labs and nonprofits, but mostly academic. When we joined this in 2004, there were about 35 member institutions. Now there are almost 100. So it's basically tripled during that time. On the other hand, there's still plenty of room to grow, because there are tons and tons of R1s and R2s that could join. So there's a lot of growth potential. That's a good analogy for research computing in general, right? There's an enormous amount of growth potential that we can tap into. And we got to be ready to get dragged kicking and screaming upstairs, because it's gonna happen, right? The baby boomers have been in charge for a long time, right? They'll be happy to tell you. By the way, I missed the baby boom by 1 year. So I'm Gen X. My sister, who's a year older than me, is a baby boomer. So Gen X, we're getting dragged kicking and screaming upstairs already. Millennials, you're guaranteed to get dragged kicking and screaming upstairs real soon. Gen Z, seems like it'll be a long time. It'll go by like that. You've got to get ready. Every day, this was said 10 years ago, right? 12 years ago. There's still plenty of room to grow yet. Every day for 19 years, 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age. Every single day. Now, not all of them are retiring at 65, right? And I don't necessarily plan to retire at 65. But that gives us a feel for the rate at which wisdom and experience is being drained out of our community. And they deserve a retirement, and a wonderful retirement. They've done amazing work. But that means we need to be ready to step up and take the reins. But the good thing is, this is the best job ever. Best job ever. Why? Because, as I said before, every single day, you get to see the value of the work you're doing. We'll send an email to some user and say, oh, if you do such and so in this way, then you'll have this outcome. And they try it and it works. And they're so happy because now they can do a thing that they couldn't do before. They can do it more efficiently or whatever it is, right? Every single day. Well, every single business day, right? Sometimes not so much on the weekends, but even on the weekends sometimes, right? In fact, last Sunday, a week ago, I had a call with a researcher because I knew this person was stuck. And I was like, hey, let's just get on Zoom. We'll polish this off in half an hour, right? Might as well get it done. And we did. And we got this person over that hump and able to move forward. Here's a bibliography of papers we've published about the virtual residency. The three that are in purple bold, those were actually published as part of the paper writing apprenticeship. And these are the various grants that have supported the virtual residency over the years. I would love to have questions. We only have a few minutes, but I love questions, and you will make me happy by giving me questions. And I will give a virtual $1 to the first person who asks a question.
Hello.
Hello, ask your question.
Yeah, this is Stanley from Nigeria.
Howdy.
Stanley from Nigeria.
Hi, Stanley from Nigeria. So ask me your question.
You've talked so much, and I have been listening, and I understand. Even over there, we look you people as a developing country, and we literally stay in the dark here. But with those problems you people are trying to submerge, how do we Africans, how can we integrate ourselves into this system? Because I'm with the University of Benin in Nigeria here. We don't have HPC. We have so much instructors here who definitely don't know what to do with HPC, even if we know we have these problems. So really, how do you people, what is the plan? What do you people have for us? How do you integrate us so that we can actually move forward?
So Stanley, your audio, your microphone is very fuzzy. So I want you to do me a favor. Can you type your question into the chat?
I'm using a cell phone. I really don't have the whatever. Maybe I'll send you an email.
Send me an email and then I'll send my answer out to everybody. How's that?
Oh, just like that. I think I'll do that.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it, Stanley. And sorry about the audio problem. Okay,
No
let
problem.
me go through the questions I see in the chat as well. Hang on. Because there's a lot of good ones here. How did you become so amazing? Okay, so now my ego has grown beyond all bounds. It's a dangerous thing. But I'm gonna answer the question in a more serious way. I have not done anything special, and I promise you there's nothing special about me. I just observe what's around me and try to draw conclusions about what the patterns are. I think the human brain is optimized for pattern recognition. We're even good at recognizing patterns that aren't there. So that's mostly it. All I've been doing over the years is looking for patterns. I'm trying to recognize what the patterns are. I think anybody can practice that skill and start to have insights that they can share with the rest of us. And a great way to share those insights on an ongoing basis, not just during this week, but on an ongoing basis, join the Campus Champions. The mailing list there is incredibly exciting on all kinds of really useful topics. There's been an ongoing discussion over the last week or so, for example, about hiring, recruiting, and retaining team members on your research computing team that I would recommend to anybody to read. I haven't agreed with every word of it by any means, but I have found it fascinating, even though I've been tied up in getting ready for this workshop. Okay, can there be a publication tying together mechanics and supercomputing? If yes, could you point me in the right direction? I don't know if there are probably publications specifically about computational mechanics. Typically, they don't focus on supercomputing as such. They focus on computational methods for doing mechanics research. Most of the supercomputing related research, mechanics might be an example, but you wouldn't build a whole journal around that one domain, that one research domain. You would build the journal around use of high performance computing in computational science, for example. And there are journals like that. An obvious example would be the Journal of Computational Science. And by obvious, I mean, if you haven't heard of it, that doesn't help. But I think I've published in it once, but I don't publish a lot of journal articles myself, mostly conference papers. What are the roles and responsibilities between multiple stakeholders in the process? I'm looking to figure out where I fit in the whole thing as an ex-educator, but very much people person with some tech know-how. So it's very fluid. There isn't a simple answer to that question, and there never will be. What you need to do, so ex-educator really means incorrigible explainer. And incorrigible explainer is incredibly valuable in the context of facilitation. What you need to move from is good at explaining it to people in my field to good at explaining it to people outside my field. That's where facilitators really shine. And we're going to talk about that in the next session, half an hour from now. But there's no simple answer to where do I fit. The real answer, certainly the answer that I came up with, was I'm going to sand down the edges of the people around me and create my own niche rather than looking for an existing niche to stick me into. And I think that's been much more effective. For my entire career, I've been a weirdo. And there's two ways to look at being a weirdo. On the one hand, if you're a weirdo, there's no models for what to do. And on the other hand, if you're a weirdo, there's no barriers to doing what you think is the right thing. I prefer that second one. Faculty often serve partly as CI facilitators in smaller institutions. Do you have any suggestions how we can manage our already large faculty responsibilities with CI responsibilities? So I am only slightly faculty. My position is 19% faculty, 81% staff. You're talking about someone whose position is 100% faculty, or nominally 75% faculty, and then you do summer work that increases your total compensation. So I don't necessarily have a good answer to that question. What I do have is a pointer to a Campus Champions affinity group where people in that situation can hold conversations about that. In addition, the Campus Champions mailing list is also a great place to hold those kinds of conversations. And I know that was a cop-out answer, but can we share these diagrams and slides? And if we want to, can we cite them? I encourage you to do that. I beg you on my knees, please, please, please share these ideas, share the content. Please give me credit. I always like people tossing my name around. It pays off. But share this with others. Absolutely. And we've got more goodies the rest of the week that you can share with others. Can you touch on a few of the expected changes with the Campus Champions transition to Access? So the Access program does not provide any funding to the Campus Champions. So the structure of the Campus Champions will change in the following sense. Well, at least to the best of my understanding. The structure of the Campus Champions will change in the sense that there will not be professional staff. it will be, I think, pretty much entirely a volunteer organization, except where other external funding separate from the Access program. For those of you who are not familiar, Access is the follow-on to Exceed. Exceed is the National Science Foundation's umbrella over their the NSF-funded national supercomputer centers. So Access is the follow-on to Exceed. And there are changes, of course, as we do this transition, which is essentially happening now. Exceed officially ends on August 31st. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but I know that's going to get covered at the PERC conference a couple of weeks from now. Let's see here. Based on this introduction, I'm even more excited to attend and learn more this week. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Lol, me too on weirdo. Yes, many of us chose this business because we are weirdos. I second Anuradha's comment. Knowing little about this virtual workshop, I was skeptical. Now I'm excited to hear more. Appreciate your inclusivity. Okay, so I am, in addition to being an incorrigible explainer and an insufferable know-it-all, I like people, and the more people around me, the happier I am. So I'm inclusive because it makes me feel better. It turns out it makes other people feel better too, but I can't pretend that I have all that many good, virtuous reasons for being inclusive. It's mostly wicked, selfish reasons. Okay, more questions. I love questions. It's my favorite thing. I know we're a little bit over, but we don't start the next session until 10:45. So if we chew up a few minutes, I'm just chewing it up out of your bathroom break. Behind the scenes, awesome people who get things done and helping others to do their research, making our days. Yeah, I mean, it's really important to understand that there's zero magic involved in this, right? This business is, we've built our business entirely on top of Band-Aids and chewing gum, right? We're just, stumbling along, feeling our way in the dark, doing the best we can. It's just over time, we stumble on enough things that we're able to make something useful out of it. Okay. In your experience helping people code, have you ever dealt with the topic of code testing? Not that much. We certainly try to encourage it. Okay, general principle. The only people who write worse code than computer scientists are scientists and engineers. The only people who write worse science and engineering code than scientists and engineers are computer scientists. In the first case, scientists and engineers write bad code because they have no training in how to write code, or very little training. Computer scientists write bad science and engineering code because they have no training in science and engineering. That guarantees the code will suck. My personal favorite, I sat down with a grad student one time. They were walking me through the code, and I noticed that their variables had the following names: X, XX, XXX, and XXXX. And these were not like 4 moments of distance or something. This was 4 completely different variables with these names. Also had R, RR, RRR, and RRRR. And when I was trying to explain what I thought was a problem in the code, I sounded like a pirate. I had another student come to me with a code they couldn't figure out how to debug. And I said, well, the first thing I noticed is you haven't indented your code at all. So can we indent your code? Because then it will be more readable and therefore more debuggable. And the student said, I don't have time for that. So I feel your pain. Getting to testing is actually already maybe more than we can expect for a novice programmer. Is there a common language that one facilitator can use to approach and speak with faculty and research community people for most scientific areas that they can understand? We're going to talk about that in the next session, in fact. The short answer is yes and no. It's not that there's a common language, there's a common approach to language that we can use. How do we differentiate virtual residents versus campus champions? Well, my goal is as many of each will be of the other. It's never going to be 100% in either direction, but my goal is to convince campus champions to join the virtual residency and virtual residents to join the campus champions. Love the certification program you're starting. A lot of what makes a good facilitator is being good with people. What, if anything, does your certification cover with this regard? Knowing this is pretty hard to test for. Right. So the next session we're doing, which is called Effective Communication, is the first session we've been designing the badge for. We're designing a badge around effective communication. Is it necessary to have a PhD to be a cyber infrastructure leader? Not only is the answer no, the answer is very no, and I will prove it. The principal investigator, the head of the Exceed project, the NSF's umbrella over the NSF-funded national supercomputing centers. So that project over the past 10 years had a budget of around $250 million, around $250 million. That project's principal investigator has a master's in astronomy. So absolutely, he is one of the biggest national leaders in cyber infrastructure, and he has a master's degree and does an amazing job. So no, you absolutely do not need a PhD to do this job, nor to be a national leader in cyber infrastructure. This is great because effective communication facilitation, since we are working to grow facilitators or institution. Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think a lot of institutions are working on. Good. Did I get everybody's question or did I miss any? The chats have been coming pretty fast. I'm inheriting our HPC work. How do I go about making an argument? Hang on. That the only staff member in our HPC should be, I'm losing it here, paid at a higher rate than our current instructional technologist. You can't make that argument the first day and expect to win. Here's a good rule of thumb. If they don't believe in you, they won't believe you. So you've got to make it so that they trust your judgment before you can say this person should be paid more because of the value of the work they're doing. And this is the thing, and we'll talk about this Thursday in the how to work with systems professionals panel. But these folks are incredibly sophisticated about technology. They know an enormous amount because they have to know, they have to have depth and breadth. They have to know storage and compute and networks and software and operating, the whole gamut, right? They are amazing people, but they don't fit neatly into the regular IT categories. And that makes it challenging. And you have to educate your chain of command up and down for people to really understand that. Okay. I desperately need to learn how to get PI's attention so my division can help them. The biggest thing we did, we got a button added on the web form that they need to fill out to route their paperwork for submitting a proposal. You get one button that generates an auto email to us. We send them some boilerplate documentation, ask them for a quick summary of what the project is about and whether there's any new stuff that we need to be aware of. So everybody who writes grant proposals at our institution has to click yes or no on that button for every proposal. That is the best marketing we have. Okay, hang on. I have a video. Sorry, chat. Scrolling is hard. I have a video on communicating with busy people that I love and I think is relatable to communicating with PIs. Yeah, if you can get us the URL, I think people would be very interested. Is it necessary to have a good sense of humor to be a CI leader? Maybe it'd be covered in the next session. I think it's necessary to have a good sense of humor to be a human being. I have never met a happy person with a poor sense of humor. So if you want to be a successful human being, develop your sense of humor. Okay, let's wrap up. We're already 15 minutes past our time. So we'll take a short break because we are coming back at 10:45. And I'm gonna pause the recording and then everybody remind me